Thank you, everyone, for coming. Jim, thank you for having me as always. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces here back in London, where I'm haven't been for some reason for the last 2 years very frequently, over from the States. So does this thing work? It works wonderfully. Okay, so let me stand next to the microphone so everybody can hear me okay. So we've experienced some great scientific presentations already this morning, and I think with my presentation and then with Greg's and some of the discussions we're going to have afterwards, we're going to switch gears a little bit, talking, more broadly, taking a step back at what this longevity space is and what it's going to mean to medicine in the next decade. And so, I want to jump in with a slide that I think always focuses me on the problem that we have at hand here, which is a person dies of one of the diseases of aging almost every second. And so if we really will have drugs that can prevent all of the diseases of aging at one time and extend health span, every day that we bring those medicines closer to reality saves 112,000 lives every day. 41 million deaths every year from these drugs. And so whenever I think about, okay, well, what makes you get up in the morning? What makes you get out of bed? The idea that, okay, well, if I can push this field forward even one day in my next year or 5 years of work, that we've saved 100,000 people, which I think is really the power of this space. Because I think we're going to be able to challenge some of the old ideas that I like to say, that we're all born and kind of raised with the assumption that we're going to live late into our first century, right? This old idea of 70 years that we are allotted. And we have the first half of this first century that's mostly healthy and the second half that's mostly declining. And I think that assumption that we make as a society is going to be challenged over the next decade, because we've found about 75 different ways of extending the healthy lifespan of animals. Most of this work is in mice, but as you've already heard a little bit today, we think humans are going to be next. And so a fundamental premise of this longevity field is that we've been approaching all of the diseases of aging, which are, as I mentioned before, the major killers of humanity today, wrong. We've been waiting for people to get sick, and only after people get sick do we decide to use our knowledge of medicine and biology to try to treat these diseases. But my assertion to you all would be that this approach has largely failed to address these major diseases of aging. And I just highlight 3 here. In Alzheimer's disease, right, we've run more than 200 clinical trials to try to treat Alzheimer's disease, essentially all of which have failed. And in that time, this is just since the turn of the century, the rate of Alzheimer's disease, or the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease, has around doubled. In heart disease, it remains the #1 cause of death, even as we've gotten better and better at treating heart attacks and managing blood pressure and high cholesterol, but there are no medicines that have the ability to regenerate the heart or keep it youthful and healthy. And then cancer, I think, is perhaps the most egregious example of this, where we spend hundreds of billions of dollars on research and development, clinical trials, to create new drugs and targeting cancer every year. And there are more than 10 drugs approved every year as new treatments for cancer. But if you look back over the last 10 years, the average amount of extra healthy life that someone will get from a cancer treatment is only about 2 months from an approved drug. And to me, this is just completely insufficient. So I think we need to challenge some of the ways that we've been approaching these diseases if we're going to make real progress against, these 3 and a few other diseases, which are the major predators of humanity in some ways. And I'm sure that many of you here in the audience have seen a graph kind of like this before, but to me, this is really the greatest summation of what trend the longevity field has recognized and is fighting against. This is a graph of normalized occurrence rates of each of the major diseases of aging. And you can see there is a point starting around our late 40s, where many of these diseases start reaching an exponential curve upwards in their prevalence. And the premise here is that damage of some kind, I'm going to use that word broadly and kind of quote, air quotes of damage, is building up years or decades before that exponential curve starts and where these diseases are diagnosed. And as we begin to understand the ways that our organs and cells and systems are breaking down, we can use not just diet and nutrition, but also medicines as a tool in our toolbox to address that damage before we ever get sick. And this, I think, will create a new class of medicines that change the way that we think about what a drug can do. Right now, we wait for someone to get sick. They've got, health. I like to, to this slide's point, I like to break the human experience into 3 broad chunks, right? You have childhood, growing from the 1 cell stage to the trillion cell stage. Then you have a healthy period of adulthood where you maintain homeostasis of your trillion cell stage. And then you have this period of old age and decline where that bag of cells that we are begins to not function so well. And it starts working a little bit less well and a little bit less well until it breaks apart. And right now, where most medicines targeting these chronic diseases of aging are waiting until our bundle of cells are really not working very well, and then try to just keep it functioning a little bit right at the end of this tail. But so many of the medicines that are part of this broader field that we call longevity biotech are working to take people who are still relatively healthy, who haven't declined to such a degree yet, and do something to them to keep them healthy, keep their bodies working longer. The big question in this field that was sort of the motivating reason for me starting Cambrian, but also the previous company that I ran and many other founders in this space, is how do you take these medicines, now that they're working in mice, right? We have 75 things that can extend healthy lifespan of animals. How do you turn that into a human medicine? And so I've broken this progress that we're going to see in this field into four distinct milestones, of which 2 of them are going in parallel in this decade, in the 2020s. The first of these 4, I think we've already hit, which is answering the question, can this approach even work? Can you build a medicine that can keep an organism healthy and extend its lifespan by preventing multiple diseases of aging at one time? And as I mentioned, we have more than 75 different interventions. Some of them are pharmaceutical drugs, some of them are gene therapies that are capable of doing that. And that's sort of like the last decade in some ways, the breakthroughs that have enabled an industry to form around this that has led to all of us being here in this room. In the 2020s, we have 2 fundamental challenges here, which is, number 1, can you use these breakthroughs that have been made in understanding the causes of aging and the damage underlying each of these age-related diseases to make safe and effective human medicines? And one way of doing that would be to run trials targeting quote-unquote aging, but this is very complicated, right? My friend Nir Barzilai is taking a great shot at this with the TAME trial for metformin, which many of you guys probably already know about. But for many new drugs that don't have the safety profile and the track record of metformin, but are fundamental breakthroughs in the aging space, they're going to be approved in another way first, not for aging, but for some other disease. And so showing time and time again that we can take these drugs that target one of the core causes of aging and show that they are safe and effective in some disease will give us the impetus as both investors and as regulators to explore those drugs in people who are more healthy than maybe the first people who get that drug. And so that's kind of the second grand challenge, demonstrating safety and efficacy of these drugs. And then simultaneously, over this decade, we're going to see a push to establish the regulatory pathways to allow these drugs to be approved for use in healthy people. And I think the best parallel to something that's happened before that we're going to see in this aging space is with the statin drugs. So many of us know about statins, right? Like Lipitor, that we take when someone has high cholesterol. They take Lipitor to lower their cholesterol. What is that doing? Well, you're taking a patient who is at risk for one of the chronic diseases of aging, heart disease, getting a heart attack or a stroke, and you're giving them a medicine before they get really sick based on a biomarker to lower their risk of heart disease. Now, what is one of these anti-aging drugs except exactly that same idea, except instead of just lowering your risk of a heart attack or stroke, we're lowering risk of heart attack, stroke, cancer, Alzheimer's, bone weakness, muscle loss, hearing loss, eyesight loss, kidney disease, all at the same time. That's all one of these gerotherapeutics or aging drugs really is. And so the regulatory pathways for getting a drug that's already safe and effective for some disease and then moving it into this preventative angle, this is not something that is completely new or unheard of in the world. It's just going to have to be a little bit different and specialized for this particular, the particular biology of a drug targeting aging. And so for those of you that are sticking around for the whole day, we're going to talk at the end of the day about the Longevity Biotechnology Association, which a group of us from this field are coming together to launch to try to help create a forum for the whole field to talk together about how to approach regulators and place and kind of drive forward this second swim lane to test these drugs in otherwise healthy people. But we'll talk about that more at the end of the day. And as these two swim lanes come together over the course of this decade, I think we'll see, and don't hold me exactly to these timelines, but in the late 2020s, early 2030s, the first evidence of drugs that are newly invented to target the causes of aging kind of combine with novel regulatory pathways that allow us to test these drugs in healthy people, and those will slam together to create the first patented, specially designed gerotherapeutic drugs to treat aging. And this is what our company, Cambrian, was created to foster, this long-term, decades-long vision of building this space. And so this seems like as reasonable a time as any to actually introduce Cambrian and what we do. So Cambrian is a company just a little bit over 2 years old that we call a distributed biotech company. So we've created a wide pipeline of new medicines, each targeting a different fundamental cause of aging. And we do this by partnering with top scientists all around the world who have made a fundamental breakthrough, want to drive that breakthrough towards patients. And we've created a platform of research and development experts, folks that think an awful lot about the strategy of how to position these breakthroughs in the aging space for their the first patients that they will go into, as well as some of the unsexy things that are required to start a biotech company, like legal and finance and operational work, and kind of package that all together to make it as seamless for a scientist that has made a fundamental breakthrough to start applying their work to a development plan that can become a drug that goes into humans. We do this by following this field that we've broken down into 13 different segments, which I'm not going to go through, but they have 3 broad categories: things that go wrong at the molecular level, things that go wrong at the cellular level, and things that go wrong at the full tissue level. So these 13 areas that we focus on are kind of broadly analogous to the 9 hallmarks of aging that have been much talked about, and I think was in some ways the tentpole moment for this field that started having more folks uniting together on the same mission than fighting with each other about which things were the causes of aging. And so for these 13 different focus areas of Cambrian, we ask 3 questions of each of the mechanisms that we want to develop. Number 1, is this some mechanism that changes as we age to cause a problem? Number 2, as that change happens, if you accelerate it, does it make things worse? And number 3, if you prevent that change from happening, or if you restore it to its youthful state, does it become better? This is a reinterpretation of the 3 postulates of Robert Koch, who is one of the founders of the field of host pathogen interactions in virology, right? Who created these rules to figure out if a virus was actually responsible for causing a disease. We can use the same intellectual exercise to ask if a mechanism is really responsible for one or more causes of aging. And this is a slide with a lot of small text, but this is just to point out very quickly, we've been able to do this. So we have currently, this has 14, we actually presently have 16 different programs underneath the Cambrian umbrella, each at a different stage of development that have started from a fundamental breakthrough, mostly at a university, although we have a couple that have been clever ideas from entrepreneurial scientists that have already left their university work, and now are in different stages of development. So we break this kind of discovery all the way through approval into a whole bunch of different steps, right? I've seen folks break it into as many as 10. You can kind of see here that we've got 7 different steps that we separate these through. 4 stages of preclinical development, and then you have your IND, which is your investigational new drug approval from the FDA, and then 3 stages of clinical development. And most of the breakthroughs in this space are at the preclinical stage and have to kind of transcend what some people call the biotech valley of death, which is the tough transition from curing a disease in a mouse to saying, okay, how do we take that drug or that therapy that has cured a disease in a mouse and figure out how to turn it into a drug that's going to be safe to put into humans, is ready to go in, is manufacturable, and then start clinical work. In order to do this, we've assembled a rather large team of folks. And so this small slide here is just our core Cambrian management team plus the leaders of all of our different programs and some of the folks that we're working with. There's now, since we started 2 years ago, more than 115 people that are needed to push to put all of this research in the longevity field together and move drugs towards the clinic. But that's allowed us to create, as I mentioned, more than 14 different programs, each held in different subsidiary companies underneath this Cambrian super umbrella that together are marching towards the clinic. So we'll have more than 3 drugs, we think, ready for clinical trials at the end of next year, with those human trials kicking off in early 2023 or the end of 2022. And as I mentioned, more than 100 people wrapped together to push this forward. This is just kind of like a really, I wanted to take a step back and kind of do a very general overview of the space and kind of how we approach it. But hopefully this is kind of an interesting overview. And I'll have my good friend Greg Bailey talk a bit about juvenescence, and I think we're going to come back and talk with Phil for some Q&A about what else is happening in the space. So with that, I will surrender the rest of my time and look forward to talking with each of you more.